So, EYFS, it is changing. And I think what we really want to look at closely today, what are the changes, what's going on? And we will, I will be able to sketch some of it, but certainly in the discussion, we can unpick that more. What are the details of what's going on? But the really important question then of why is this happening and how is it happening? And given the expertise that you have and that people all around the country have about young children, about their learning, about the way we work, how much information and understanding and insight has gone into this? Who's actually making it happen? I think we have to really question that. Undoubtedly, it's happening. It's come in through a back door, and I'll look in a minute with you at how that came about. But what it's resulting in is a sweeping change to the whole system. It was originally trailed as reformed early learning goals. And I think the DFE had the naive view that, oh, we can just change the assessment instrument. We're only changing the profile without realizing that it all ties together and that one change has a ripple effect through the entire system. So the early learning goals and also the educational programs, which are the summaries of what those areas of learning are about. And because of that, we will also have a new development matters. And at the same time, we've got the push to baseline assessment. They had considered junking the profile altogether and replacing it with baseline assessment, but there was a lot of argument in favor of that rounded observation-based assessment at the end of the EYFS. So they kept it, but they also want baseline. So I want to look at that with you briefly too. So what does that mean? What are these changes going to actually mean for children's experiences? And that, I think, has to come back to the question that we put at the core of the way we assess anything. What does it really mean? If it's on paper and it won't matter to the children, it doesn't really matter, does it? But if it's going to make a difference in what experiences are offered to children, what kinds of interactions, that's where it counts. And then, yes, what's our role in it? Do we have a say? How can we have a say? So I'm going to take you on a very quick historical tour because I think it's important when change is happening to put it in the context. So we have the EYFS. This is actually its sort of third go at developing what should our framework be, because as you, I'm sure know, it started in 2008, it became official, after quite a long process of pulling together these previous documents. The curriculum guidance for the 3 to 5-year-olds, birth to 3 matters, plus the care standards. And the idea was, care and education aren't two separate things. Why should we have two separate frameworks? And it's a continuum on from birth. So how was that done? Well, it took a long time. Ruth, you were there at the time.
Remembering the pain.
Yes, the pain and the intense effort to share the process with the sector that went on in meetings all around the country, over and over. Come back again. What do you think of this version? What are the issues that most concern you? And everyone had a say. And it was a real consultation before it was pulled together. So what we came up with was the EYFS based on principles that are the sort of bedrock, that we have that strong principle of a unique child. And then, so what else do we need? Well, what affects children's development, their relationships, their experiences in their environment, and understanding more about learning and development. So these are our core, and very much that it's the play-based approach, which is the law. So that's what we got. And lots of beautiful, colorful cards and CDs and all kinds of illustrative things. Well, then 2012, it was time to review it. Fine. It's always a good idea to see, what's come up, what's better, what could we do better than what we have now. So the Tickell review happened, and we got a revision Unfortunately, they weren't into pictures. So we just got a very dry statutory framework, the bare bones. But it made some important alterations. Again, the Tickell review went on for over a year and involved endless meetings, consultation events, people, you can look in the back of the Tickell review and there are pages of who contributed and how. So again, it was owned by the sector. So what did we get? Well, we had a reaffirming that formative assessment starting from the child is the way we work in the EYFS. We had a new emphasis, and the first time that it was made statutory, that we have the characteristics of effective learning. And that was something that I was most pleased with this revision, that it pulled out the things that had been kind of buried in the poster for the EYFS under learning and development, and said how children learn needs to be a core focus of the way we work. So it's the law. We must reflect on them and we must show these in our work. So that's great. And what that was trying to get at was the whole idea that developing self-regulating learners is one of the most important things we can do in the early years. And there's now, it's a buzzword, self-regulation, and the government's putting it in, but they don't understand it. You could give them credit for trying, but the way I would look at where self-regulation sits in the EYFS currently is we have PSED, and that is a prime area, absolutely core, fundamental, and that's where emotional self-regulation sits. And alongside that, we have cognitive self-regulation, which is in the characteristics of effective learning. The New Zealand system of assessment looks at dispositions for learning, and the first thing they say is a child ready to learn? And that they would put together this side with playing and exploring. Is the child feeling the well-being? Are they feeling good and ready to engage? And are they out there having experiences from which they can learn? And then they look at the motivation. They're ready, willing. And then also what kind of meaning making is going on? How is the child thinking about? So are they able? Ready, willing, and able. So great stuff. This is good self-regulating learners. So at that time, we also had the rewrite of Development Matters, which had been sort of stepping stones in the previous version, because the system changed. So we had 7 areas of learning, needed to be rewritten. But in that, we put together our themes and thought, let's make it really clear that the unique child is the learner that brings who they are and the way that they engage in the world. And then our job are those middle two, the way we relate to children and interact with them, and the experiences. We developed this document with, again, a huge amount of input. We debated with Department for Education what it might look like, and it had an advisory group of people who really were early years experts that we looked at the structure and so on. And then when we started working on it, it went through 7 versions and went around all these people, and also we trialed it across all kinds of settings. So tried to make it, again, as much sector input as we can. What's happening now with the Development Matters is a bit of a mystery. We know it's been commissioned to have a rewrite. I'm very concerned that they seem to be separating the pre-reception side from the reception side. And they're talking about it as being more a curriculum. So a structured curriculum to guide through in all of those areas. And so far, it is not being shared, but Dr. Julian Grenier, who is working on, has been commissioned to do it, says there will be consultation. So I think we need to watch that space and hope that that does develop. So what do we have now from the Tickell review? We have the prime areas, as you know. We have the links to the specific areas. At the core, the unique child. Prime areas, always on the go. Children gradually expand through the specific areas. And what drives it all is the characteristics, that the child is the one who does the learning. So they spokes of the wheel drive the learning and development. So it's a pretty good framework, isn't it? Yeah, pretty good. And everybody says that. If you ask practitioners, people all around the world think it's really good. However, it's time to change it. I would say if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So why are they doing it? Well, they did a consultation on primary school accountability. Now, if you saw something come up, primary school accountability, and you were someone working with an 18-month-old, would you think that's for me? I need to answer that? No. So early years people didn't. And these were the ones who did answer. And, you know, the bulk of those were reception teachers in school. And overall, only 16%. So it was not the voice of early years. But on the basis of that, they decided, oh, we need to change it. They said, we need to do all of these changes. Yes, none of the questions was, we're thinking of reviewing and rewriting the EYFS. What do you think? But that is what's happening. And they're changing the whole thing. We have new early learning goals, proposed new educational programs, which have been written to suit reception age children because they see it as linked to the early learning goals, not from birth. And they've changed around the aspects of development in ways that aren't helpful. Okay, review is a good thing. There are things that could be better. I want you to just stop and think for a minute. If you could change one thing, what would it be? DFE's initial rationale, they said we're doing this, we've made the decision, we need to clarify and refine some of the early learning goals. And we want to reduce the assessment burden on teachers. And that's very much the message all the way through. They've now moved the goalpost slightly. They're saying we want to reduce workload. So that's not just the teachers in reception. And that is a really laudable aim, isn't it? To reduce workload. I would argue that you don't have to change the whole framework to do that. The way that they are attempting to reduce the workload is saying, don't evidence it so much. You rely on your professional knowledge, rely on what you know about children, and don't feel that you have to tick every box. Just, know the children and do your occasional sort of best fit and follow the child, etc. But don't write it all down, or don't do it all electronically, or however you're doing it. And you don't need to evidence it, and that Ofsted is accepting this now, because Ofsted is really the pressure there, isn't it? So changing the framework isn't going to change that. It's a different way of working that's the issue. And then approving attainment, especially language and literacy for disadvantaged children. Well, I would argue the changes they've made have done the opposite of that, or risk doing the opposite. Okay, so here's what's happening. This is our existing framework for the prime areas with the aspects. So I'm just going to give you a quick run through. What they've done in communication language is initially they took out attention and they took out understanding. They said it's just speaking and listening. Well, in terms of supporting children's language development and supporting practitioners to understand how that works, that if you're not paying attention, that's where you start, and then you look at understanding, well, that's not going to be very helpful, is it? Well, they had a lot of comments about that with their pilot phase, and so now they've changed it. Oh, they took out understanding, but they moved it into literacy. So we now have 3 early learning goals for literacy and only 2 for communication language, which is, in my mind, very much the wrong way around. But because people complained that you can't take out attention and understanding, what they've done now in the new proposed thing is just called it listening, attention, understanding, but haven't changed any of the content. So, yeah, absolutely crazy. Okay, what else have they done? I am, in some ways, most concerned about what they've done to PSED. It's a total mess. They took out those 2. They have more or less kept making relationships as an idea. And this is what we've got. So we've got building relationships, managing self, and then self-regulation. Well, they do not understand self-regulation. What they have put under that are 3 statements. One is about relationships, so it belongs in relationships, and it's that emotional self-regulation side. One is totally from the characteristics of effective learning, so they're duplicating some bits out of that. It's about setting goals and being able to follow them. And one is about attention that they've taken out from communication and language. So how is that going to help practitioners to understand what the whole thing self-regulation is about? You can't just take those 3 little bits. It's just confusing and a total muddle. And under managing self, some of the things are from characteristics, which include persistence, etc. This one really bugs me. Know right from wrong and be able to say the rules and try to follow them. Well, I think how many ethicists couldn't tell you how you know right from wrong? You know, according to whom? And what does that mean to a 5-year-old? I think it's much more important to say, understands the consequences of their actions for other people and so on. But no, know right from wrong. And then it includes health and self-care, which has been taken out of physical development. So is that PSED? Health and self-care? So originally we had personal, social, and emotional development. It was PSED. But now it's not personal, social, emotional. It's a mess. Okay, physical development, moving and handling has been split. So all we have is gross motor and fine motor. It gets a paragraph about that long as the educational program, and it covers nothing of the range of what physical development really entails for young children. It's just movement, being able to manage fine motor. Okay, what have they done to the specific areas? Understanding the world. Technology is totally out. There is none. The world is gone. What they've done is they've tried to mirror disciplines for older children. So we have science, history, and geography. And they are very unlike the comment here about being rooted in your own culture and your own background and family. It's about reading texts, nonfiction texts in class, and being able to identify historical important figures, narrative figures from texts read in class. Absolutely unrooted in children's experience. Well, no, that's the ELG. So we will have to wait and see when Development Matters comes, what it might say then. But even for a 4 to 5-year-old, why do they need to be able to important historical figures and be able to identify a beach in Australia as different from a beach in Brighton? You know, they're supposed to know about different parts of the world. Anyway, maths, we have no shape, space, and measure. That was totally removed because I think number is the only thing that counts at this age. In the the piloted version, there was just no mention whatsoever of space, shape, and measure. They have now alluded to it in the educational program and say children should have manipulative opportunities to explore it. But there's not an early learning goal around it. And when you think how assessment drives practice, you see what we're going to get. So numbers, it's just number and numerical patterns like doubling and halving. And they have to have automatic recall of some number bonds and that kind of thing. Expressive arts and design, this one I think, why in the world have they changed it? It is no way better. They just changing things for the sake of it. Initially they took both of those out and they called it creating with materials and performing. They again had a lot of comments that performing is not an appropriate goal, so they've changed it back to being imaginative and expressive. Why is that better than what we had first? And the actual content is not better in any way that I can understand. So they're not being called on to justify these. Yeah. Literacy, we have now 3 early learning goals because reading, they said, oh, we've got the message that it's not just phonics. There's word reading, which is phonics. And then there's also, oh, it's supposed to mean something. So we better put comprehension in there. Well, and because of that, they've taken understanding out of communication and language, as if literacy is the center and not communication and language. How can you understand what you read if you don't understand what you hear? And strangely enough, all of the comprehension content is oral. So you might as well put it back in communication and language. And the thing that concerns me even more about it is then the word reading. Well, the comprehension, as I've said, has nothing to do with reading. It can be able to explain when somebody's read you a story, you can tell them what it was about or retell the story. So there's nothing about reading, understanding what you read. And then the word reading is totally say the words, say the sounds, make the words. And the writing, similarly, record the sounds of words. Nothing about comprehending what that thing was trying to tell you when you were reading the words. And in writing, it's not about communicating a message for a purpose. It's not meaningful. And that actually reflects what they think. We have to get the phonics right, and then we'll start thinking about meaning in literacy, which is totally the wrong way around. Okay, so where are we? They did their pilot version in 25 schools. It was evaluated by NatCen for the Early Endowment Fund, Education Endowment Fund Foundation. And they were only looking at clarity, not whether they're the right goals, just did they work. We are now launched on a public consultation, which Beatrice will tell you quite a bit more about. Then they're going to issue in probably the spring the pilot framework, and people will be invited to use it from next autumn, and then it will become statutory the year after that. We have an EYFS coalition, which is what Beatrice will give you a lot of detail about, with all these organizations saying, hang on, you need to ask us, you need to listen to us and work with us, please, because we want this to be good and we want to work with you. So they've done a survey of practitioners and parents, effective practice examples, and you'll hear more about all that. Okay, I just want to finish with what's going on with baseline assessment. Play, not tests at 4. That's one of the catchphrases. There was a big march on Downing Street. It's been a very active campaign. Nevertheless, of course, it's going to happen. So why? It's to assess school effectiveness. It's not to make anything better for children at all. It's totally about school accountability. It's going to be set a data point which we can store away for 7 years, and when they finish their Key Stage 2 SATs, we will look at it to see whether the school has got good progress for their children, judged against other schools. They make no claim that it will be in children's interests in any way. It's a one-to-one test with the teacher within the first weeks. It's got to be within the first 6 weeks. And the child is pulled out of the classroom or somewhere quiet. Some schools are reporting they had to spend an extra £600 for supply cover because the teacher's out for hours and hours. It supposedly takes 20 minutes per child, but teachers are reporting it takes twice that because, of course, you have to get them out, you have to organize things, you have to settle them into the activities. It is a script. So you can't support a child who you think, I need to say that in a different way because they don't understand that way of saying it. So it's a script and it's a yes-no answer to each point. At the end, I think the heads now they've decided are not going to get any cohort data. I'm not quite sure about that. They were consulting on that. Teachers are being given, quote, narrative summaries. There was a lot of complaint about whether children will be labeled at this early age and put into groupings and things that then become, you're stuck in them because other groups have moved on faster, so you're stuck. And they've said, oh, no labeling, but they're giving narrative summaries of how well they did in these areas. What does it cover? It's about English and maths, basically. The test is in English. So think how many children entering reception are not going to be able to show what they know, understand, and can do because English is not their first language. It covers maths, literacy, communication, and language. Scoring, every item, yes or no. It's got a routing system so that if you answer 2 or 3 incorrectly in a row, it takes you off that strand and puts you on something else so you don't get endlessly asked things you can't do. But we have had reports of children in tears and crying, saying, I can't read. Why are you showing me words when I can't even tell you any letter sounds, etc. But generally, people have said, oh, children like the one-to-one time with the teacher. I find that really sad. If that's the only way they get quality time with their teacher, what are the teachers doing? Well, they're out in the corridor, one-to-one, instead of being where the children are and really getting to know them. It's an invalid and unreliable way to do this. It makes no sense statistically. The BERA group put together a panel looking at of assessment experts. They said, is it in any way legitimate? No, it's flawed, unjustified, wholly unfit for purpose, and bad for children, bad for schools. Why is it unreliable? Well, because of this. You know, children at this young age are going to respond in a different way, depending on the relationship and the environment they find themselves in. And from day to day, whether they're hungry, whether they're tired, get a different answer each day. So you're not going to get yes or no that makes sense and gives you any true picture of what that child can really do. Useless because it's invalid. Waste of public money. It ignores factors which are the most important if you actually want to make a predictive thing. It's not looking at who that child is as a learner, the characteristics of effective learning, really their language use. It's just, can you point to a particular picture on a picture card, not how they use language to express themselves. There's a real worry about the push-down effect, that if this is what we're measuring the minute they enter reception, what are preschools going to think that they need to focus on? And what are parents going to think they need to focus on? Because this is what schools want to know, and that's what ready for school comes to mean. How well will they do on the baseline? This was a YouGov survey. Heads and school leaders are saying, no, this is ridiculous. It's inefficient, it's not reliable, it's unfair, it's not an age-appropriate way, and particularly children with special needs, English as additional language, summer born, it's not going to give you in any way a picture of those children. Alice Bradbury did a study, and some of these quotes I think are very telling. Ridiculous. There's nothing wrong with the way in which early years staff assess the children on entry at the moment. We are trying to engage parents, and a lot of them say, well, it's a good idea. Of course, they should find out when children come in what they can do. Yes, of course they should, but not this way. And people do have much better ways in place. Absolutely ridiculous. Precious time wasted on tests when they should be getting to know the children. This was Alice's study, Pressure, Anxiety, and Collateral Damage. And these quotes, I think, are really worrying about that pushback effect. Preparation starts as soon as the 3-year-olds step through the door. Schools that have nurseries, we're getting them ready. And we're really aware now the work starts right from the moment they enter the school nursery. And it's this, that empty vessel picture. And it's about the content of what we have to teach children, rather than helping children to become strong and curious and motivated learners and going with them on that journey. Timeline. They did the trialing of individual questions. This year they had voluntary pilots that have taken place. It's going to become statutory next autumn, is the plan. And then in 2023, they will remove Key Stage 1 SATs, because these children will have got to that point, so they can use those for their accountability measure. That's why it's happening as far as most people are concerned, that they want a baseline. And that's why the National Association of Head Teachers is supporting it, because they think, well, we'll get rid of SATs. And they will not be used until 2027. Just wanted to finish with a sort of rallying cry that it's going to happen, it is happening. And to try to ensure that the knowledge that you and all of the people that you are in contact with has a way to feed into this. And Beatrice will be talking to you about some of the action that's going on around that. But I think that's our core concern at the moment, because this is our last chance, really, before they issue it in the spring to say this is it. So it's a small chance, but we have to use it. Thank you.